to all who are watching, and a very warm welcome to the Festival of Bharat. We are an online forum that seeks to create wide-reaching content on diverse topics pertaining to Bharat, and in doing so, serving the cause of the civilizational principle we call Sanatana. Bharat has always been ahead of the game, so to speak. The modern-day Indians don't get to see that because of years of indoctrination and falsification of history and manipulation of facts. The result has been that we have a very warped understanding of our own culture. I have with me a senior scholar and academician today who will help us see just how forward-thinking the Indian thought and mindset has been, especially with respect to matters related to social and sexual mores of our society. This is important because we have always been pegged down to be orthodox at best or immoral at worst. The truth is far from it. So, Dr. Bharatji is with here today. Bharat Guptji is with here today. Dr. Bharatji is an Indian classicist, theatre theorist, sitar and surbahar player, musicologist and newspaper columnist. He is a retired professor of English and he taught at the University of Delhi. Presently, he is a trustee and executive member at the Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts. Much of his writing is devoted to classical Indian and classical Greek drama, comparing the similarities and differences and exploring the possibilities of common Indo-European origins. Welcome, Bharatji. I am so happy to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, Pujita. I'm very delighted to be with you and with this undertaking that you have done. I think it's a great enterprise for the young, and I am very happy to be associated and make a small contribution to help your efforts.
Thank you so much, Bharatji.
Yeah. And so,
just one, yes.
I am here to answer your questions, which I understand are about ancient India, the life that we used to have in ancient India. You have chosen a very important area for investigation because we, in public discourse, know very little about ancient India. We make very great efforts to think well about it, which we should, and proudly about it, which we should. But the details are not known to us and they are not discussed in public discourse so often. So what you are doing is something which is going to help people a long way. Yes?
I really hope so, Bharatji. And I'm sure it will because these are very, very important, like you rightly pointed out. Important matters to be discussed, often not talked about openly, but important nevertheless because they form the fabric of our society. So, thank you so much. Bharatji, I just wanted to open by asking you about, these are difficult times, so I hope everyone is well at home. And, how is Delhi taking has everything settled down on the vaccination drive? Has that gone well?
Well, by the grace and kripa of Bhagavan Shiva, I and my wife, we have kept healthy under this great threat so far, and I have been working hard and trying to do my bit, so all is well.
Yes, I know your videos are quite popular online and you've been pretty active, I can see that, and I'm glad that everything is well. Good. So Bharatji, without further ado, let me start with my very first question, which is to do with the idea of morality, the subject, a very tricky subject of morality.
Yeah.
So what is because this is something that everybody wants to know.
Right.
What is the Indian, the dharmic approach to the idea of morality? What is immoral, what is moral, what is illicit? So is there a standard view to this?
Look, broadly speaking, morality means a sense of good and a sense of bad. what a person or a society or a group of people should do and what they should not do. This is the broad definition of it. What is karma and what is akarma, what is dharma, what is adharma. But then, for every civilization, the idea of good is different. The idea of bad, therefore, is also different. Because every civilization looks about the question of what is to be done and what is not to be done in terms of how that civilization defines the universe. What is the universe? Is the universe made for man only? Or is it made for man and animals and birds and all other sentient beings, and are even inanimate objects of nature, the elements, are they also part of the universe? Are they equally important or are they less important? Now these are all very vital and fundamental notions that make up the view of the universe that a civilization or a culture has. And hence morality is defined within the scope of all this. So, the Greeks used to call it, for them morality was ethiki. But
What is what?
ethiki, from which you have the English word ethics.
Ethics.
So the Greeks would say ethiki, but their notion of what was ethic or what was good was a little different from, let us say, the Christian version. And similarly, the Chinese version was a little different. Confucius thought of it a little differently. So you have to see in terms of that. Now, today in the world, as most of the cultures like Greece and Egypt or ancient China, they have kind of receded into history. What dominates is the Abrahamic concept of what is ethical or what is right or what is wrong. Now, in these worldviews, primarily the Judaic, Christian and the Islamic worldview, what is to be done is following a command. You see, this is most important. Follow a command which was given to us by our prophet. So there were so many prophets in the Judaic tradition, beginning with Abraham and Elijah and Isaiah and all that. And then comes Christ, who doesn't call himself a prophet but the Son of God, and he says do this and don't do this. And then his successors, the Christian church, they define what is to be done and what is not to be done. So this was the view till Christianity dominated the world. And then there was in Europe a revisiting of ancient Greece, and they thought that Christianity was very restrictive, and reading the Greeks and the Romans, they kind of expanded. They put in a lot more reason into this whole business of what is to be done and what is not to be done, and we had the age of enlightenment. And it is at this point that colonization began, and then in the 16th, 17th century we have the arrival of the Europeans into India, and finally by 19th century we are in the grips of the British rule. So when we think of the West today, or when we think of anything outside India, our experience is not that of ancient China or ancient Greece or ancient Egypt or the universe of American Indians or the people of Africa or Australia. Our experience of the outside world is kind of nebulously called the West. And the West is largely Christian morality or Islamic morality. in this, as I said, the great feature is that the words of the prophet are to be honored. So there are the 10 commandments given by Moses in the Judaic tradition. The Christians follow it. Then for the Muslims, there is the Quran, and the whatever is revealed to Muhammad in the holy is collected as the ayatas of Quran, and that is the morality for them. Now, Hindu morality or traditional Indian morality is different.
Right.
It is a morality based upon what may be called not the command, or not what the prophet told you, or what was given to you as an injunction, but it is based upon the notion as to what is the right karma at this given moment. Shall I do this or shall I do that? If my father says, do this, do I follow him or do I oppose him? It's not that I must always obey my father. Well, there is a general injunction that I should obey my father. But then, when there is a vital conflict of interest, or when there are choices, then I have to apply my sense of what is dharma and what is adharma. So, when Rama was told by Dasharatha that go into the forest for 14 years, he said happily so, because his father, he saw, was compelled. His father had given his word. He had to honor, his father had to honor the word, and so Rama said, fine, this is dharma and I'll follow it. But when Bhishma was told by Shantanu to allow him to get another wife in old age, then Bhishma, in order to please his father, got so carried away that he abdicated himself without thinking whether it was right for him to please the old man who was just struck by desire. Shantanu was under no compulsion to marry. He was doing it out of pure sexual lust. And Bhishma did not tell his father that it was not right for him. He only went by the letter, and then we know that Bhishma Pratigya, although great, Bhishma Pratigya, although because he led a life of great asceticism and sacrifice, so it brought him virtual immortality. He could postpone death as long as he wished. He had great powers, but the consequence of his vow was not beneficial. It could not prevent a Mahabharata.
Right.
So, in the Hindu system, by Hindu we mean Jain, Buddhist, all the darshanas of our culture. In those systems, dharma is to be followed according to the dictates and the demands and the needs of the hour. There is no single immutable injunction. The choice has to be made by the individual. And it is to be defined, it is to be seen according to the hour.
Correct.
So, what is karma and what is not karma? I will decide to see if that karma is dharmic, then I'll do it. Although it may cause me a lot of pain. But if it is adharmic, I will not do it. So,
and the idea of dharma also is flexible, I'm guessing.
no, dharma is not flexible. Dharma is the eternal law which sustains the universe.
Right.
Dharma is something which sustains us. But Dharma sustains us through our karma, through our action. So we must have the sense to make the right choice.
Right.
When Karna encouraged Duryodhan to disrobe Draupadi, then that was bad karma. But when Karna told the Brahmin that he would give his kundal and kavach, and he gave it to him, then he did the right thing. Because he was fulfilling his vow of not turning away a supplicant. Because he was a dani and he had to follow the injunctions of being a dani. So he caused harm to himself and he gave away, knowing that this may bring, or rather will certainly bring him death. Now this was dharma. But the same man made the wrong choice in the Rajya Sabha at Hastinapur. So you see, dharma is not something which is defined by an injunction. Dharma is something which is served by an injunction or by a karma. So if you make the right choice,
Right.
if you do the right action, then dharma is protected. Then dharma arises. If you make the wrong choice, then it is adharma.
Right.
But dharma is always that which sustains you. And if we follow dharma, that is, if we protect dharma, then dharma protect us. Dharmo rakshati rakshitaha, as has been said. Yeah.
Right.
Right. So the Indian sense of morality is something which rests upon your timely choice. The West has a problem about this. Very often people think, deep scholars in the West think that Indians are very lax and they are very, indecisive, and they can work out shortcuts and they can work out all kinds of excuses to not do a thing. And some scholars like Wendy Doniger always says that a Brahmin can fix something for you. If you are in a difficulty, he'll show you a shortcut. So the Westerners, they don't understand, and very often they think that this is a weakness, because they themselves are used to black and white injunctions given by their prophet.
Yes.
For them, that is the sense of morality.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is no initiated
Analysis. There is no analysis of the
action. No
moment.
analysis. Yes.
It's very late that you have people like Robert Frost saying that I did not take this road, I took the other road, the road not taken.
Not taken.
So it is at this time that that the West starts thinking in terms of alternatives and in terms of the equal validity of alternatives. Before the 20th century, and this is when the West was fully acquainted with the Indian philosophical systems. So the earlier systems were not at all flexible under the Christian or the Islamic milieu. Unfortunately, Islam still lives in a very deep orthodoxy.
This is very pertinent, Varaji, since you mentioned the orthodoxy in Islam. What is your view of what's happening right now in Afghanistan? Where do you think it's going to go with the Sharia law?
Well, it's not the topic of the day, so I'll briefly say that I am afraid that the coming few years would witness some very big tragedy.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we talked about morality and we talked about the Indian perception and the Indian view of morality, it is but natural that we talk about something that is even more contentious, and that is the the topic of karma, or what people construe or misconstrue as erotica, or so could you throw some light on what karma really means? And in continuation, since you are an expert, you have an expertise on the Kama Sutra, dispel some notions that people have about Kama Sutra being a book or not book, especially Islamic and Christian view of the book being nothing but pulp fiction.
Yes, they think of Kama Sutra as gymnastics for sexual poses, gymnastics for sexual intercourse. Now that of course is a very limited view of looking at just one chapter of the Kama Shastra, just the very, very physical thing, and extremely small portion.
It's only one chapter.
Only one chapter and small portion. And Kama Sutra is about sexual life, but in India, sexuality or sexual life or sex, or what now the West calls sex, and what the ancient Greeks used to call eros,
Eros.
love, eros, which was the physical as well as the mental as well as the spiritual desire. So the idea of karma is very profound. You see, the Nasadiya Sukta, which describes about how creation came into being, or how the world or the cosmos was created, it says that there was a will, or a wish, a karma, a desire, which led to the formation of this universe. So the fundamental force of creation, not just of procreation, but creation of every kind, is karma. And in the Indian system, we talk of the four aims of life, or rather the four modes of life. And they are dharma, artha, kama and moksha. Earlier they were only defined as three: dharma, artha and kama. Moksha was considered part of dharma. So kama is very important. Kama is a purushartha, that is what a person, purush here means not male, but it means male or female or hermaphrodite, all three genders. Kama means desire which leads to creation. And it is a purushartha, or it is a pursuit, a great pursuit. So it's a fundamental thing along with dharma. Dharma, kama and artha, they all three sustain each other. It is not possible that there can be a society or a fulfilling life for an individual without kama. Now, I have lectures on the videos, several videos on the Kama Sutra, and people can go to my YouTube channel and see them. They are there, mostly in English, but some in Hindi also. So I have given a whole description of the ancient life of desire. Now here I'd like to summarize something, the whole concept of Kama. In India, the idea of Kama can be seen at four stages. There is fulfillment of Kama at the physical sense, at the level of the body, at the level of fondling and sexual intercourse and all the kinds of pleasure that it provides, and it has to be without any guilt. Unlike the old Christian paradigm, indulgence in sex is something beautiful, and it is something which is to be conducted between man and woman with mutual respect, love and affection. It is not a domination of the male over the female. You just have to read the Kama Sutra and great Indian literature and poetry to verify that. So that is one aspect. Then the second aspect of Kama is to have a sexual relationship in the form of marriage, which is for the sake of making a social unit of family, where you have to procreate, where you have to raise children, where you have to make able citizens, where you have to do things in which skills and sciences and arts are passed over to the next generation. So that is the social aspect of Kama, which is the family, the marriage. The purpose of marriage is not individual satisfaction or meeting of two minds or two bodies, as has been the romantic ideal since Romanticism came into being in the 17th century in Europe, Shelley and all this.
Yes.
So that is the second. Now the third is Kama or desire or sexuality as associated with arts, Shringara.
Shringara.
So it is associated with poetry, with dance, with music, with all kinds of natya and art, and also with sexual relationship outside marriage with a courtesan or with a lover within certain defined social norms which were observed in ancient India, but about which we have no idea today and which are not part of our morality. So this was the third level of association of Kama or sexual desire or eros with aesthetics, with rasa, with beauty. And then there is the fourth level, which is that Kama is the strongest of desires in the form of rati or desire or longing. And this longing then goes beyond the longing for a sexual partner or a human partner, and it seeks the divine as a partner. So that is the fourth level where it becomes bhakti, where it becomes worship of the divine, surrender to the divine. So these are the four levels. The physical level, which is the subject, partly the subject of Kama Sutra, because Kama Sutra is not just about man, woman's physical satisfaction. It's also about arts, it's also about social norms, it's also about marriage, family, rules of family, kinds of marriage, and mutual respect, and many things which make life artistic. So it is about almost everything, bringing you right to the door of pursuit of the highest goal in life, which is looking to the divine through Kama, where Kama becomes a door to the divine, because arts are a door to the divine.
There is a chapter on bhakti also in Kama Sutra, Bharatji?
No, there is no chapter on bhakti or any chapter which talks about the pursuit of the spiritual in Kama Shastra. Kama Shastra stops at the first three levels. The physical, which is the chapter, the Samprayogic, And then the social, which talks about marriage, which talks about how to choose a bride, what are the kinds of marriages, how to have what is now called love marriage, but which was called Gandharva Vivaha, and how Gandharva Vivaha is a legal, justifiable, desirable form of marriage, and how it can be done sometimes even without the consent of the parents, and how it is legal. Kama Sutra is talking about all that. It is talking about patronage to arts, patronage to poetry, dance, music, to musicians. So association of sexuality, man-woman relationship with the arts, and sexual relationships beyond marriage. That is relationship with a courtesan, because there was the whole institute of the courtesan in which men could go and have a sexual relationship with the courtesan, who was not there to provide only physical satisfaction but aesthetic satisfaction, who was
that
there.
was actually my third question.
Yes. Yes.
What was the role according to the Kama Sutra and according to the other, many other texts in literature that do celebrate courtesans and devadasis?
Yeah.
So,
You see,
what is the role of the courtesan?
Yeah, you see, those things are very clearly defined because they were part of the social system. Now today, most of our intellectuals who are interested in ancient India don't like to freely talk about it, especially the elderly ones. And unfortunately, our dharma gurus or our swamis and sannyasis, they almost discourage people from even reading the Kama Sutra or various other shastras or texts. There are dozens of them about the sexual life beyond marriage in ancient India. Now, in ancient India, the institute of the courtesan, that is a woman who would provide you sexual pleasure living in her own place. She had her own house, her establishment, which was a social institution, which was recognized and protected by the state, because she paid taxes to the king for protection and for medical assistance to keep healthy. This was part of the ancient Indian system, where a man, obviously a man who could afford it, would go and would have physical satisfaction, but much more than that, the house of the courtesan was a great place for dance, music, poetry, philosophical discussions, for creative activity, and people went there to savor these things, to enjoy these things. So there were goshtis, or there were gatherings of learned people at such places. So a Veshmagraha, as it was called, Veshmagriha, or a Veshyagraha, was not just for what we see today or what we think of as a one-night stand, or just as something for quick physical relief. This was very different. And it was not only in India, it was so in China, Japan, Greece, many other cultures. And in the ancient world, it was there. It was frowned upon by the Judaic people, by the Jews, who, as I said, had a very distorted approach towards sex, who thought of sex as something sinful, as is quite clear in the very first chapter of the Holy Bible, the Genesis, that when Adam and Eve disobeyed God and tasted the apple, then it is the result of the apple that they got sexually aroused and they indulged in sex. So sexuality is immoral. The very act of sexuality is not part of the scheme of God, but it is a transgression. It is an act of disobedience. See, disobedience is, so it's not something good. So the Judaics had this attitude. The Christians, who were actually Judaics, because Christ was a Jew, he was born as a Jew, and he elaborated upon that system. The Christians then promoted monogamy. The Christians promoted all these sexual restrictions, and that's how the world was introduced to monogamy. But of course, Islam did not take that view. For Islam, sexual indulgence is a great boon. And
that's another worldview.
Yeah, so their worldview is that it is something which is to be indulged in, and of course, in the Islamic worldview and practice, the woman's consent, pleasure, or will has no rule. But in the Islamic world, sexuality is something which is to be fully enjoyed, not only on this earth, but in heaven also. So that's the third view or approach. But the Hindu approach, as I have said, is a calibrated approach and a far more sophisticated and a far more rewarding approach, because it has room for different stages of development of a single person. So in the Hindu society, till about 7th, 8th century, or till about, let us say, the arrival of Islam, the courtesan houses were protected, and they were looked after by the state. After the arrival of Islam, the courtesan houses continued in India, but they did not have in the same manner that kind of legal status. But they did continue, and it's with the British and the Victorian morality that although they continued, they became subterranean. So they were pushed into the so to speak, underworld. And unfortunately, independent India has not been able to come out of that schizophrenia, and it has not been able to understand the values by which the Hindus who lived before the 10th century AD.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Bharatji, you had mentioned, and continuing a little bit on a similar theme,
Yeah.
when you're talking about morality, karma, etc. You spoke about extramarital and liaisons, and premarital, or
Right.
love marriages, or things like that.
Yeah.
It would really help if you gave us some examples of anecdotal or examples from the Shastras or the Itihasas.
Okay.
Where we see
Yeah.
that,
Yes.
just like for example, you said Kanda Vivaha. So also I wanted you to reflect, perhaps talk a little bit about the two different paragons of virtue that we have. We have Rama, who is he's a monogamous, he's held as a virtue, a symbol for monogamy. And then you have somebody like Lord Krishna, who had, so this is often talked about, how is it that Lord Krishna had so many wives, how was it acceptable?
Yeah,
so on and so forth.
I'll come to the comparison or the contrast between Rama and Krishna later. But let me first give you very briefly the different kinds of legal marriages that were practiced in ancient India. In very ancient times, let us say till 2000 BC and even earlier, it was very clear when the Smritis were compiled, and the observations of the people who wrote the Smritis were compiled as Smritis, seeing what was being practiced in India, what they saw as being practiced was virtually 8 kinds of marriages. You see, today the Hindu marriage, not just as defined by the Hindu Marriage Act of 1956 or whatever, I forget, but as the concept of marriage in the common Hindu mind is just a one kind of marriage which was called the Brahma Vivah. But it was not the only way. There were 8 kinds of vivahs. There was this Brahma Vivah in which 2 families decide to let a young man and woman enter the vows of marriage, and there is the ritual of Kanyadan, which means that the daughter is formally gifted or given. Dan is not as shedding an old shirt. Dan is giving something very precious and deep. You know, many reformists, particularly reformists in the BJP today, they have a very poor notion of Dan. And they think Kanyadan is something to be dispensed with. Now this is very wrong notion. So there was Kanyadan. Then the second kind of marriage was what was called Deva Vivaha, or in which when you performed a great sacrifice or a yajna, then you could give your daughter in marriage with Kanyadan formally and mantras and everything to the head priest or the Ritvik who did the marriage. Then there was the third kind of marriage in which a disciple would come and request his guru and say that I ask the hand of your daughter, and he would bring a gift of a pair of cows, and in a very simple ceremony he would be given the daughter. So this was the third. Then there was a fourth in which the teacher or the learned Brahmin or anybody else would normally say that, okay, take my daughter and marry, because I have given you education, I have taught you, so you look after her, make her your wife and raise progeny and follow the teachings that I have given you all these years. Then there was what was called the Asur Viva. So this fourth was called the Prajapatya. Yeah. And the fifth was Asur, in which you gave a certain amount of money to the girl's father, bride price. But again there was Kanyadan. Now then there was Gandharva Vivaha, in which a boy and a girl, they simply said that we love each other and we accept each other as wife and husband, and here we are. We go to bed now and we are husband and wife. There is no need of a witness, there is no Kanyadan, nothing. Now that was also a legal marriage. And Kama Sutra defines that sometimes you could go to a temple and do it, sometimes you could do it entirely alone, sometimes you could do it without the knowledge of parents, later on reveal it to them. So this was what we call love marriage today. But it was a legal recognized system. Yes, it was a legal system. If the girl said that yes, he vowed it to me, then her word was accepted by the court of law. And you have examples of this in Shakuntala.
Yes.
In the story of Shakuntala. Then there was what was called the Rakshasa Vivaha, in which the woman was abducted. Sometimes she was abducted with her will. Like Sanyukta was abducted by Prithviraj, and Krishna abducted Subhadra. Arjuna abducted Subhadra with consent. And then there was finally a very low form of legally marriage, but entirely condemned form, in which the woman was seduced and drugged and then violated. But later on, if the families agreed, there was a marriage. So the Shastrakaras and the whole system, they say that the first four are the best. Asur, in which the prices offered is not so good, but then it was done. And Gandharv is something which is a concession to human nature. And the seventh and the eighth form, they condemned it. They said this should not be done because it is against the wishes of the families. And they are acts of violence. So because there is violence in the Vivah, Pishacha Vivah, and in the Rakshas Vivah, so they are condemned. But Gandharv Vivah is something which is tolerated, accepted, and there are so many examples. Now, why is it that there were so many codes? It was because in ancient India, you asked me about morality. In ancient India, there were certain norms which were kind of all India norms, which was called Shastra Achar. That is conduct according to Shastra. Then there were all over India certain customary laws which were called Lok Achar or Lokachar. So Lok means what is happening in certain regions, in certain areas. And they were also considered as legal, valid. So the marriage of Draupadi to 5 brothers was a Lok Achar. Most of us, we don't even know the basics about it. It is still practiced in Himachal in certain villages.
Yes.
So there were all these variations in different parts of India, and the high and the mighty, they thought that they were as valid as what is written in Yagyavalkya, Manu, Parashar, or any other Smriti. So the idea of marriage was flexible in this sense, not that you could do anything, but that you were given many more options. And these things have prevailed. For instance, the Guru giving away his daughter in marriage to a disciple was very recent, like Pandit Ravi Shankar marrying the daughter of his Guru Alauddin Khan. So that was, it was according to a Hindu tradition. So it's a Prajapatya Vivah, if you want to call it that way. Now they had certain social functions between certain sections of society. For instance, the kings would be giving daughters to certain priestly classes of Brahmins, and these daughters would be going into Gurukuls then. And hence there would be a close, permanent relationship between the royal home and the universities or these education centers. So this was according to the older system, in which the kings would consider that their daughter marrying is a virtue. I don't know how glamorous it is for a member of parliament today to give his daughter to a professor or a lecturer. I don't think he'll think very highly of it or be very happy about it. So on this count, India has declined.
So this brings me to another related question, Bharatji.
Yeah.
Is what about intercaste? Like with this whole idea about in India today, there is such a rigidity with respect to marriages, especially between in intercaste marriages, have raised a lot of flag in the society even today. So what was the system like? I mean, like you just gave us an example of how Kshatriyas, the daughters were given their hands were given in marriage to the sons of rishis and so on and so forth. So clearly there was an instance, or there was a prevalence of intercaste marriages in those days. So can you probably talk a little bit more about that, because I think it's very relevant given how things have shaped up in our society today.
Look, there were rules in what you now call intercaste marriage, or marriage between Varnas. And the rule was simple, that a woman of the lower Varna could be married by a man, but a woman of the higher Varna, higher to his Varna, could not be married. So this was the rule, and according to this, Kshatriya girls could marry saints and Brahmins. Now most people would think that this is something which is Brahminical, but most of these people who are so gung-ho on criticism of Brahminism, they don't realize that a Kshatriya daughter, well fed and well cultured and well looked after, she goes into an ascetics place, she goes into a Brahmin and lives there in a Gurukul. So going into a Gurukul at that time was not moving into the luxury house of the Vice Chancellor, it was going into a hut. So that was the truth of it. And as a matter of fact, nobody wanted that his daughter should marry a Brahmin. I mean, I have hardly come across any instances where people would say, aha, let me upgrade my family connections by giving my daughter to a Brahmin. This is something which happened only under very special circumstances and certain social norms, as I said, that if he did a great yajna for you, and this kind of a Deva Vivah was that done only in that sense. Again, a man of the higher Varna could marry a woman of the lower Varna. So a Brahmin could marry a Shudra woman if he wanted. I mean, and there are so many examples, I need not repeat them. And the reason why a higher Varna woman would not be sent to marry into a lower Varna was very clearly not a case of discrimination, but it was largely a case of wasting your resources. You see, modern societies are wasteful societies. Modern societies have too much to splurge. Whereas ancient societies always valued their resources, because as compared to modern post-industrial, post-television societies, post-media societies and scientific research, culture societies, they were very poor societies as compared to us. You see, they had very limited resources and they wanted to use them in the maximum optimum manner that they could. So, if you take a Kshatriya woman and if you send her to a Shudra's house, what would she do there? I mean, she wouldn't know how to help in creation of a shoe, making of a shoe, or a pitcher, or fishing, or something like that. So that was the primary reason. You see, we should not judge ancient societies by modern standards of freedom and modern standards of preparation of the sexes. See, if people of different Varnas go to a school which is common, then to a college which is common, then it's an entirely different situation now. The exposure is different, because here people, boy and girl, they have grown up in the same kind of atmosphere. They know each other. So a Brahmin girl can go and marry a STSC. Yes. And if the STSC is an IAS officer, then everybody would be happy. They'll forget that she is a Brahmin. They'll just remember that he is an IAS officer.
He's an IAS officer.
Yeah. So we have to see the realities.
True.
But this is how the Varna system operated. Everybody was not famished poor among the Shudras. You see, we have this whole notion that the Shudras were all Chandalas, that they were all untouchables, that they all lived outside the precincts of the town, that they were all constantly spat upon. No, this is just nothing but a complete atrocity literature which has been generated post Christian efforts at proselytization in India, and it is still being generated in a very sophisticated manner by departments of Indology in the West, where they have this kind of bias. The ancient societies, the Shudras, were very prosperous. The bulk of them were prosperous because they manufactured things, they supplied things, they sold things. Of course, there was a hierarchy. Of course, there was a sense of high and low. But modern societies are worse in that. Modern societies talk more of equality and practice more of inequality.
Very true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, please.
So again, tagging on to what you just spoke of, another very contentious topic is that of homosexuality, and again a taboo subject, something that is especially taboo in, you wouldn't think it that way, but especially in Christian Western societies where homosexuality is still a problem, so much so that there are places or states or regions, especially in a country like America, for example, where it is illegal. So, what was the Indian view? What was the current,
Yes.
view? And could you speak about that a little bit?
Let me tell you that the Indian Shastras, the Indian texts, sociological texts, if you want to call them, they recognize that nature created man, the male, created female, and it created the third gender. And there is a proper technical word for it, Tritiya Prakritihi. It is Kama Sutra which defines it, and it says that Tritiya Prakritihi, the third gender, is of two kinds. Stri Rupini, Purush Rupinishcha, Dvividha Tritiya Prakritihi. The people of third gender are of two kinds. Some who have more of a male tendency and some who have more of a female tendency. So a woman may be behaving like a male and a male may be behaving like a woman. And that is the third gender. They thought this was God created. It was not a perversion. It was not a consequence of any kukarma, bad karma done in the past age, past birth.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not very clear, although there are myths about how it happened, but that was more in terms of accident, more in terms of tragedy, rather than some kind of immorality.
Right.
So if you go into that, this is what was accepted. But it is also true that certain professions were reserved for them, which were not very highly elevated professions. But they had all kinds of professions reserved for them. For most of them, they were professions related to the house of the courtesan, and they were sort of pushed into, or they, by their very sociological arrangement, they were largely sex workers. So people of the third gender would be sex workers, They would be entertainers, they would be dancers and actors and actresses and that kind. They would go into the performing arts, and they would also work at the courtesan houses. And of course, some would stay at home and continue to live in their families, and they would behave as if they did not have this problem, but it was not a hidden problem. It was an acknowledged problem. And there were all kinds of studies about them, and different texts. They define the kind of third gender, the different kinds of third gender. And there are different names for it, like Kleba and Shanda and Shikhanda and like Shikhandi, etc. And they would define as to why this has happened. Why is somebody important or is somebody not important? All the various drawbacks, if you would like to call them, or you would say different varieties of what was their physical nature, was acknowledged. And then under law they were protected. They could not be abused, they could not be ridiculed, they could not be tortured, and if it was done, then there was punishment, as there would be punishment for transgressing or violating another normal person. So this was the situation in ancient India. It continued pretty much in the Islamic societies. Islamic societies have always used the third gender in a very, very useful manner, and they
You
are.
had, I think, Malik Kafur, was he?
Well, not only Malik Kafur, they had a whole system in which people were forcibly castrated, and then they were made into fierce fighters. Their whole sexual energy and their prowess was geared to war, and that was one of the customs of the Islamic empires, which they used all the time. And they made them into assassins, and they made them into warriors. All
that would be forced, Raji. That would have been
no,
forced.
the forced aspect of it was the castration.
Yes.
But then nurturing them into fierce fighter was something which was not, it was forced in the sense that they were pushed into this life, certainly forced into this life, but it was very often a highly respected profession. And they were elevated to become kings. So, yeah.
This brings me to another area, of a controversial area again. Not controversial so much as much talked about, and has been, the center of many debates, etc. Is that of feminism, gender equality, and things of that nature, Bharatji. Especially in India, this is gaining momentum, and there is a general perception, especially in the world outside of India, that Indian women are always treated, or have a secondary position, or that they're subjugated, or they don't have the freedom or liberty. And I personally experienced that with a lot of people in the West, even today, have clung to those notions. It would really help if you think about.
Yes, I always ask my Western friends, and I don't mean it as an affront.
Right.
Why is it that with all these notions of equality, gender equality, there is a virtual disappearance of family in Europe and America? And no matter what you say, disappearance or weakening of the family has very severely damaged European and American society. It is creating immense psychological problems, and nobody can deny that. So there is something fundamentally wrong with this whole discourse of gender separation. You see, we very often think it in terms of equality. Now, first of all, the notion of equality, as it came to be propagated from the time of Rousseau, equality, fraternity, equality, fraternity, and what's the third? Three values. Liberty, yeah. So they are very numerical. This is the fundamental difference. That if there are 50 people, then 50 must have a certain amount of liberty, unquestionable common denominator of liberty, common denominator of equality in terms of they can vote, or they can enter institutions, or they can conduct marriages, etc., etc. And then, of course, fraternity comes naturally out of that. This is something which has a lot to do with the industrial and the post-industrial society. It has a lot to do with developments in modern science in which women were not required to be so busy with certain roles and activities as they were earlier. The very first was reproduction. Around 20th century, the birth rate was high and the death rate was low. Modern medicine, of course, made a big difference, and hats off to modern medicine. And so women did not have to produce 10 children, out of which 5 died, and very often 3 women out of 10 would die in childbirth. So there were women, plenty of them, who were not so occupied in certain things as they were earlier. And with industrialization, what you needed was to send those women to office, just like men. So this whole notion of equality is an economic notion fundamentally, where it is given the garb of rights, whether I have the right to work in an office, whether I have the right to travel by myself, whether I have a right to seek a job I like, etc., etc. But this is fundamentally putting women to work in the same manner, and perhaps with the same slavery of modernity as men. So you see, you want women to take up the roles of men, or take up the same roles. So this whole notion that men and women will do the same roles within the house, outside the house, and it will be sameness, is something which can happen only after certain technological innovations and environment.
Right.
Now, to blame the ancient societies for not doing this
Right.
is not just so unkind towards the ancient societies, whether of anywhere, but it is ignorance.
It's ignorance, true.
So a woman had to produce 10 children, and maybe
this
not.
was true everywhere, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean not just in India. That's what I'm saying. It was the human condition.
Condition, yes.
Now, if you look at that, I mean, I have given you this as a prolegomena to what I am going to say. In ancient Indian society, equality of women has to be seen in a different manner. Not in modern terms. It is not to be seen in terms of uniformity or sameness. That women were able to do the same jobs as men, and were they able to dress the same way? Were they able to choose their sexual partner the same way? So if you put aside the sameness for a while, and if you look at what women were doing, not were allowed to do, but what women were doing, then you will see that they did not have a raw deal. It's a modern notion that the old ancient Greek woman was just restricted to weaving, and she had to sit at home and weave the rugs and all that, and just go from kitchen to the weaving room, from weaving room to the kitchen. Now this is all a modern prejudice and a distortion of the ancient Greek life, or similarly the Hindu life. For the life, social life of women, you have to read the Kama Sutra. As I told you a few minutes back, that the sexual encounter, it was suggested, prescribed, or admonished, or propagated through literature. The sexual encounter had to be with mutual affection, with equality. This is what the whole Kama Sutra is about.
Right.
It's not a glorification of ancient India. There is textual evidence.
References. Right.
Then women, the Kama Sutra says, will be educated at the house of the father, after marriage at the house of the husband. It is explicit there. Of course women were married early. There is no point in making apologies as to why they were married at the age of 14. Okay, as soon as they reached puberty, soon after they were married, because they had to reproduce 10 children. And if they were to be married at the age of 30 today, as they are, then they'll have only 2 children with medical help. So, the ancient societies.
Recording in progress.
So, as I was telling you, the freedom of women consisted in fulfilling themselves as educated women. And the Kama Sutra makes it very clear. Now, the Kama Sutra also gives you a detailed account of what they were to be taught. And they were to be taught by private tuition and by certain other means. And it is not vague that yes, they were taught. No, they were taught 64 arts. And these 64 arts are not just some petty small skills like making garlands or designs or weaving the carpet or something. They were very sophisticated knowledge systems, like philosophy, like study of arts, like study of dance, poetry, music. So they were what you would call today, by all means, what you would call as higher education.
Bharaji, was this only for the courtesans, or this is?
No. This is not for the courtesan.
Okay.
This is for the average woman. Now, obviously, in any society, a woman of low means or a woman of poor status will not go for any education. She would be compelled to just, scrounge for a living. So we are talking here of, let us say, the middle class and upwards. India was always a middle class society. It was not like ancient Egypt or Greece or China, where you had only the rulers and the ruled. It was not like Europe, where you had the royalty and the serfs. The bulk of the people in India were middle class.
Right.
They were Vaishyas and Shudras, prosperous. And even the Shudra women would learn their arts related to their profession, related to their jati at home. And the women of Vaishya, women of Kshatriyas and Brahmins would go for all these higher systems of education and arts. The Kama Shastra narrates the 64 kalas, the 64 arts. And they were practiced because you have evidence of it. After all, how did Indian society become such a productive society in the field of arts? Can you tell me a country which produced as much art as India did? I sometimes offend my Western friends, and more so some of those Indians who live in the West or teach in the West, by saying that India produced more art than any other culture. But this is a simple fact.
This is a fact.
You see, our whole system emphasized on patronizing the art. Everybody was asked to patronize art, not just the kings, but the common man was asked to patronize the art. It was part of his grihastha karma, grihastha dharma. As a householder, he was supposed to finance the education where the brahmacharis or the students could go and learn for free.
Right.
He was supposed to provide for those who had retired to the forest after giving up the grihasthashram duties. So it was a society in which dhan and dhan for arts, all kinds of arts and artists and sustaining artists, was a major sociological system.
Very true.
And this is where in modern India, under the Nehruvian system which followed the Soviet model of academies, this is where the great mistake was made, that we have a system where we provide patronage to arts through bureaucratic orders and bureaucratic identification.
Yes.
Whereas in ancient India, we simply provided direct help to the artist, to the artisan, to the creator of the arts.
It was.
And then one of the greatest institutions for art was not only the courtesan house which I told you, but it was the temple. Yeah, your voice seems to have frozen. Yeah, you are back.
Can you repeat that point once more, Bharatji?
Yes.
Point to make.
Yes, let me. You can edit. You can edit that.
Yes.
I was saying that one of the greatest institute which patronized art and provided a place for arts and artists, dancers, poets, musicians, grammarians, scientists, scholars, was the Hindu temple. And also the courtesan houses. The courtesan house is a house in a limited manner, but the temple in a vast manner. And the temple economy in India was a vast economy. That's why the temples were prosperous also. So they were prosperous just as certain corporate houses are. But the corporate houses today are based upon greed, upon collecting money and power and going in for cutthroat competition. Whereas the temples were for the benefit of all sections of society. From the very poor people who would provide garlands and cleaning and things like that to the temple, to the scholars, to the pandits, to the archakas, to the to the Shilpis, to the architects. So everybody had a very solid function to perform, and the Hindu temple was able to provide them patronage. And all this patronage was artistic. Even our puja, our archana was artistic. It was not bare, or it was not, austere. It was something beautiful. So gods were praised. Aarti was done 3 times with dance, with music. In great temples, there were dancers who would do the Aarti along with the archakas and along with other things. I think we have to discover why arts were a fundamental part of the Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Why they were considered as leading towards the divine. Art, being a door to the divine, was a common belief and practice in India. Every artist said that by pursuing art, he is progressing or she is progressing towards something higher and communicating with the highest.